The rain came down like a judgment, a cold, persistent drumming against the windows of Detective Miles Corbin's office. It was a sound he'd come to associate with bad news, and the bad news was sitting on his desk in a manila folder, its contents screaming a story that no one else seemed to hear. The death certificate was a single, stark piece of paper. Cause of death, traumatic injuries. Manner of death, accidental. Time of death, 2:17 a.m. But what really caught his eye was a smaller note, scrawled in faint pencil on the side, case closed. Miles had been a homicide detective for 20 years, and his gut was a finely tuned instrument. His gut was telling him this case was anything but closed. The victim was a young, brilliant architect named Julian Hayes. Julian's car, a sleek, expensive sports car, had been found at the bottom of a ravine just off the winding mountain road known as Blackwood's Pass. It was a classic one-car accident, the kind that happened every season when a driver took a turn too fast or a tire blew out at the wrong moment. But Julian Hayes wasn't a reckless driver. And Blackwood's Pass was a road he'd driven 1,000 times. Miles had seen the preliminary report, the one that had been filed before the case closed. Note was added. It mentioned a few odd details that had been quickly dismissed. A single dark scuff mark on the driver's side door. A small, almost invisible splinter of glass on the dash, not from the windshield. A half-eaten granola bar found on the passenger seat, even though Julian had been driving alone. To everyone else, these were footnotes. To Miles, they were a puzzle and he couldn't resist. He pushed aside the stack of open cases on his desk and pulled the Julian Hayes file into the light. He started with the basics. Julian Hayes, 32 years old. Up-and-coming architect at a prestigious firm. Engaged to a beautiful and wealthy woman named Clara Vance. He had everything to live for. No history of depression, no debts, no known enemies. Julian's fiancée, Clara, was the first person Miles went to see. She lived in a sprawling, modernist home overlooking the city, a house Julian himself had designed. She was elegant, poised, and heartbroken. "It was just a terrible, horrible accident," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. The police said he must have lost control. But Julian, he was so careful. He never took risks. Miles noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she held a porcelain teacup. He also noticed that she was wearing a single diamond-encrusted ring on her left hand, a ring he knew Julian had given her. It felt like a small, private flag of mourning, but something about the perfection of her grief seemed off to Miles. "I'm sorry to ask, ma'am, but was anyone else with him that night?" Clara shook her head. "No, he was on his way home from a meeting. He was working late, a final pitch for a new project. I was already in bed." "Do you know who the meeting was with?" "His boss, Alexander Sterling." Miles thanked her and left, the image of her perfectly composed grief lingering in his mind. He then went to see Julian's boss, Alexander Sterling, a man whose reputation for ruthless ambition preceded him. Alexander's office was on the 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a testament to his success. Alexander was brusque, impatient. "Julian's death was a tragedy, Miles. A terrible shame. He was one of our best. We had a meeting that night, a late one, yes. We were finalizing a pitch for a huge development project, the one that was going to make Julian's career. He left around 1 a.m. I haven't seen him since." "Did you talk about anything personal?" Alexander scoffed. "Julian was a professional. We talked about work. That's it." As Miles left the office, he felt a familiar prickle of suspicion. Alexander was too eager to close the conversation. The way he spoke of Julian was less like a valued employee and more like a tool that had suddenly broken. Miles went back to the old, dusty files on Julian's case. The original patrol report mentioned that Julian had been found wearing a very specific, limited edition wristwatch, a vintage piece he had inherited from his grandfather. But the official police report said the watch was missing. Miles looked again at Julian's file. The missing watch had been noted by the first officer on the scene but was later listed as unaccounted for in the final report. Why would they change it? Miles's suspicion grew. He requested a full forensic report of the crash site, something that had been expedited and filed away with minimal detail. The new report, much more comprehensive, confirmed his suspicions. The initial impact on the car was not from the front or side, as a high-speed accident would suggest. The car had been hit with a significant force from the rear. A small dent, but enough to send a car spiraling off a mountain road. And then there was the glass. That tiny splinter on the dash. Miles sent it to the lab for analysis. It wasn't from the car's windshield or side windows. It was from a small, specialized type of glass, the kind used in high-end binoculars. This was no accident. It was a setup. The questions began to multiply. Who would want Julian Hayes dead? And why make it look like an accident? Miles returned to the last night of Julian's life. The meeting with Alexander Sterling. The missing watch. The faint scuff mark. The glass splinter. He had to dig deeper to find the motive. He began to look into the new development project Julian had been working on. It was a massive urban revitalization plan, a multi-million-dollar deal that would change the face of the city. Julian's firm was competing against one other company, a smaller but well-connected outfit run by a man named Victor Thorne. Victor Thorne was a man with a reputation for playing dirty. He had a history of shady deals, hostile takeovers, and a string of failed partnerships that had all conveniently ended in his favor. Miles decided to pay Victor a visit. Victor's office was the antithesis of Alexander's, a cluttered, chaotic space filled with stacks of blueprints and half-eaten takeout containers. Victor was a large, boisterous man with a loud laugh and a handshake that could crush a rock. "Julian Hayes," Victor said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "A talented kid. A shame what happened. We were supposed to go head-to-head on that project. I was looking forward to the competition, honestly." "Did you ever meet with him, Mr. Thorne?" "Only briefly at industry events. We weren't exactly friends. Our styles were different." Miles asked about the project. Victor's smile widened. "The city's going to announce the winner any day now. We're confident. Very confident." Miles left Victor's office feeling a new level of unease. Victor's confidence wasn't just professional, it felt personal. It felt like he knew something Miles didn't. Miles went to the city's public records office and found the original blueprints for Julian's project. He noticed something strange. A small section of the development, an area designated for green space, had been marked with an annotation that was out of place. It was a series of coordinates. Miles entered the coordinates into his GPS. It led him to a remote, abandoned lot on the outskirts of the city. There was nothing there but overgrown weeds and a dilapidated fence. It didn't make any sense. But then he remembered the granola bar. A seemingly insignificant detail that was bothering him. He looked at Julian's work schedule. The meeting with Alexander Sterling was booked from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. The crash was at 2:17 a.m. Julian was found with an almost finished granola bar, a brand he was known to eat, but it was on the passenger's seat. Miles looked up the brand. The wrappers were new, but the granola bars themselves were from an old, discontinued batch. Someone had placed that granola bar in the car, and they had bought an old stock to avoid it being traced. Miles went to see Clara Vance again. This time he didn't call ahead. He found her in the garden, watering roses. She looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Detective, I'm afraid I have nothing more to tell you. I'm trying to grieve. Ma'am, I have a few more questions. I have reason to believe Julian's death was not an accident." The teacup shaking tremor was back, but this time it was more pronounced. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The watch," Miles said, his voice low and steady. "The police report said it was missing, but the first officer on the scene saw it. It was a vintage piece, right? A family heirloom." Clara didn't respond. She just stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. "And the granola bar? It was on the passenger seat, not the driver's side. Why would he be eating it then? And the brand was discontinued. Someone had to have bought a specific old batch to make it look like he was driving late and snacking. Only someone who knew his habits would have been so meticulous." Clara's composure finally broke. The perfectly poised mask shattered. "I don't know about any granola bar. But you know about the project, don't you, Clara? You know about the coordinates on the blueprints. The ones that lead to an abandoned lot. The lot Julian was going to buy from under Alexander Sterling's nose." Miles had done his homework. The abandoned lot wasn't a part of the city's master plan. But Julian had seen something there, something no one else had. It was a perfect piece of land to use for a new, revolutionary development. He had planned a secret meeting to acquire it and cut his boss out of the deal. He had done his research, and he knew Alexander Sterling had a hidden history of using the same accident method to get rid of people who got in his way. Clara, Julian's fiancée, was a pawn in Alexander's game. She had been his informant, giving him details about Julian's every move. Alexander had promised her a partnership in his firm, a promise of a new, wealthy future. But Clara hadn't known the extent of Alexander's plan. She thought he was just going to ruin Julian professionally. She didn't know he planned to kill him. Miles laid out the facts, piece by piece. The single scuff mark on the car, he now knew, was from Alexander's high-performance car, a low-slung, sleek vehicle that was designed to be untraceable. The glass splinter was from a pair of binoculars Alexander had used to watch Julian from afar. He had waited for the perfect moment on Blackwood's Pass to ram Julian's car from behind, sending it plunging into the ravine. Miles didn't have a smoking gun, not a confession or a video, but he had something more powerful. Motive? The city project. Alexander knew he would lose the bid to Julian. He was desperate. Killing Julian and staging the accident was the only way to get the project for himself. Miles left Clara, her tear-stained face a testament to her betrayal and fear. He had his confession, a verbal one that would hold up in court, but he needed more. He needed the watch. It was the key to everything. Miles knew that if the first officer on the scene had seen the watch, Alexander must have come back for it. What? It was a simple question with a complex answer. The watch was an heirloom. Julian would have had it on him at all times. But more than that, it was the one piece of evidence that would have been a direct link to a struggle. If someone had hit him from behind, Julian's hands would have instinctively gone to the wheel, but if there was a struggle in the car before the crash, his watch would have been scuffed or damaged. Miles returned to Alexander Sterling's office. He walked past the receptionist and straight into Alexander's office. Alexander stood up, his face a mask of fury. "You have no right to be here, Miles. This is harassment." Miles didn't flinch. "Where's the watch, Alexander?" Alexander laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the sterile room. "What watch?" Miles walked to Alexander's desk and pointed at a silver paperweight, a small replica of a vintage clock. "The watch your grandfather gave you. The one you told everyone you inherited. The same one Julian's grandfather gave him. The same one that went missing from Julian's body." Alexander's face went pale. He hadn't just killed Julian for the project. He had killed him for a legacy, for something that had been passed down from father to son. Alexander had a history of feeling inferior to his father, a renowned architect in his own right. Julian, a young, talented architect with a legacy and a vision, was a direct threat to everything Alexander had built. Miles's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You killed Julian because he was better than you. You killed him because he was going to beat you for the project, and you killed him because you wanted his legacy for yourself." Alexander didn't say a word. He just stared at Miles, his face a mixture of rage and terror. Miles took a step closer. "I have Clara's statement. She's willing to testify. I have the forensic report, the one that shows the rear impact, the one that the first officer tried to ignore. And I have the glass, the kind that only comes from high-end binoculars. The kind a man who likes to be in control would use to watch his prey. Now you can give me the watch, or I can get a warrant and tear this office apart, and when I find it, I'll have all the proof I need." Alexander's hands were shaking. He didn't speak. He just slowly opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He reached inside and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He placed it on the desk and opened it. Inside, the vintage wristwatch, its face cracked and the band scuffed, sat in the palm of his hand. It was the only tangible proof of a struggle. The watch had been damaged during the crash, but the new scratches on the face were from a desperate struggle, a final, frantic attempt to escape. Miles picked up the pouch and looked at Alexander. The death certificate said, "accident," but the evidence screamed murder, he said quietly, a final, damning statement. The silence in the room was deafening.